Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got him.
The suspect in the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk was taken into custody less than 2 days after the attack at Utah Valley University. We are going to be speaking with a private investigator to break down all of the key evidence investigators say they have so far, including surveillance footage, the recovered rifle, strange engraved bullet casings, and messages investigators say the suspect sent to his roommate. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Major headline. They got him. Less than 36 hours after Charlie Kirk was gunned down during that campus event in Utah, authorities say the man they believe is responsible is now in custody. And if you're just hearing about this case for the very first time, here's the quick version. This, blew up everywhere, so I'd be surprised if you haven't heard about it. But we're talking about Charlie Kirk, the 31-year-old co-founder of Turning Point USA, a married father of two, and one of the most prominent conservative voices online. He was shot and killed September 10th during a college tour stop at Utah Valley University in Orem. There were roughly 3,000 people that had gathered on that campus, and there is video from that scene. It is disturbing. It shows Kirk under a canopy, surrounded by security and metal barricades, when somebody in the crowd asked him about gun violence, and seconds later, a single gunshot rings out. The bullet strikes Kirk in the neck. He collapses as people scream and scramble for cover, and Kirk was rushed to a nearby hospital but pronounced dead. Authorities believe that the shooter fired from the roof of a nearby building about 150 to 200 yards away. And then you fast forward to now. Today, Governor Spencer Cox stood at the podium this morning and made this announcement.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got him. On the evening of September 11th, a family member of Tyler Robinson reached out to a family friend who contacted the Washington County Sheriff's Office with information that Robinson had confessed to them or implied that he had committed the incident. This information was relayed to the Utah County Sheriff's Office and scene investigators at Utah Valley University. This information was also conveyed to the FBI. Investigators reviewed additional video footage from UVU surveillance and identified Robinson arriving on UVU campus in a gray Dodge Challenger at approximately 8:29 a.m. on September 10th, in which he is observed on video in a plain maroon t-shirt, light-colored shorts, a black hat with a white logo, and light-colored shoes. When encountered in person by investigators in Washington County on September 12th, in the early morning hours, Robinson was observed in consistent clothing with those surveillance images.
So let's talk about the suspect. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson was arrested on September 11th on suspicion of capital murder, weapons, and obstruction charges, and authorities saying it was his own family who tipped off law enforcement after either confessing or strongly implying that he was behind it. And FBI Director Kash Patel said that Robinson was picked up just 33 hours after the killing. So here's what we're learning about Robinson. Grew up apparently in Washington, Utah, and we got confirmation that Tyler Robinson had attended USU for one semester in the fall of 2021. Apparently he was a pre-engineering student, possibly took a leave of absence. But family members say that his politics became quite hardened, that he specifically criticized Charlie Kirk, saying he was full of hate and that he was spreading hate. And the evidence, that is what we want to talk about right now, the evidence that investigators have laid out so far. It is a lot. We are going to get into that. But first, to help me break down what we have heard so far, I want to bring in private investigator Ashton Packe. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ashton. It's really good to see you.
Thanks for having me back.
How realistic is it that authorities were able to identify and apprehend this suspect in under 36 hours? Given this attack, given what we're talking about, the geography, the amount of people, the circumstances, does that seem surprising to you? Is that just, it seems like just great police work, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's a solid police work. I mean, I was kind of shocked they didn't have him sooner. I think maybe they actually had him identified and they were just working on locating his physical, where was he actually hiding at? Shout out to his father. My understanding is retired law enforcement officer who, still kind of maintained his oath, and how hard that must be to turn your son in. But I think, all your FBI agents, all your Homeland Security investigators, your local state cops, the university police that were there conducting the, trying to locate this guy. It's probably a very solid team effort by Utah law enforcement.
Now, you know we've been on top of the story from the very beginning, and we are able to do that because of the incredible support that we get from our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. Think about that. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. You have another client in Pennsylvania who received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan, they make it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. One thing that was interesting is when they first held a press conference yesterday morning, they said there was surveillance. They weren't going to release it yet. And then later in the day, they release an image, a person of interest. Then we see the roof footage. You know, like, I have to imagine that helped. I have to imagine they got a lot of tips and people, you know, they were probably looking for somebody like this. It's what we saw in the Mangione case.
Yeah, that's a pretty secluded, not a secluded part of the country, but I mean, that's a tight-knit community up there in Utah. I think for the most part, most people know everyone. So I think releasing those photos and the videos are a no-brainer. Somebody there probably saw those and immediately started making contact with law enforcement as to who the subject was.
Do you know why there might have been a resistance to release it immediately if they had it? And I'm not exactly sure what was going on, but I did wonder at the time whether there was a reluctance to release the footage immediately because you had already been seeing people on social media falsely attributing the shooting to certain individuals, and maybe they didn't want people running rampant. But also, don't you need the public's help?
Yeah, it's a delicate line that law enforcement has to walk. As a retired law enforcement officer, it was great to be able to release information to the public that we knew would help in a case, but at the same time, we needed to maintain the integrity of the prosecution. I think what we have here is you get the clickbait era of Twitter or X, depending on what you're calling it. Everybody wants to have the scoop. Everybody wants to be able to say, hey, they're the first to post the information about the shooter. And then these events, these tragic incidents are just so chaotic in the moment, and everything is so emotional. And it just, I think law enforcement, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back in. So they're probably a little reluctant at first to post what they had in those videos. But as the investigation proceeded through the days after this attack, yeah, that they had to lean on that video surveillance and those pictures.
And from an investigative point of view, is there a challenge when you're talking about a public event like this and you have so many videos and you have so many potential witness statements? What are the challenges in interpreting all of that when you have a crowded public event where an attack takes place?
Well, I mean, we can discuss the issues of gathering evidence, what we call right of bang or post-attack. I mean, the bottom line was we can also discuss where was the law enforcement presence at this community, at this college? Where was the counter snipers? Was a site assessment done? We can talk about those things. Ultimately, you have mirrored video and people shooting video that you now need to capture as evidence. It's a challenge for law enforcement. This is where the feds and the FBI can kind of come in and, stand up that large, multiple terabyte hard drive that can store thousands of videos and pictures. That's where your partnership with FBI and federal agents come in. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure. And in the chaos of that moment, I can't even imagine the initial investigation, just trying to put the pieces together to try to locate the suspect.
So I want to go through the evidence with you, and I want to start with the video. So the FBI didn't just release still photos, they put out surveillance video. Gives us a very clear look at this potential shooter's escape. And in the clip, you can see a figure dressed head to toe in black, sprinting across the rooftop at UVU, just moments after the gunshot that killed Charlie Kirk. And the person runs to the edge of the building, hangs for a second, drops down to the ground, disappears toward a nearby wooded area. And that detail matters because not far from that spot, investigators later recovered what they called a high-powered bolt-action rifle wrapped in a towel. And next to it, those strange engraved shell casings that Governor Cox described today, which we're going to get into, they were there. So Ashton, based on your experience, how difficult is it to, set up that rooftop escape like the one seen in the video? I mean, first of all, it seems like this was definitely planned, right? Knowing where to set up. But to escape like that, in that fashion, is really alarming.
Well, I think your shooter is probably relying on the chaos that is occurring in the moment where Mr. Kirk was gunned down and that response there. So all eyes are on on that, people tunnel vision on that right there to the scene of the crime. You had the initial reports, people screaming and yelling at a man in the crowd who they thought was the shooter. We kind of saw the same thing when President Trump nearly was assassinated in Pennsylvania. The chaos of the moment, and luckily with, of course, Secret Service counter snipers were able to take that shooter out. But it doesn't shock me that this guy was able to get away the way he did. My concern is, how did he get up there in the first place? Why was there no law enforcement or security detail assets tracking that, picking that up? A simple drone flying over the event could have picked up. That could have been your counter sniper contingent for law enforcement or for the private security detail. So, I know for sure when the after action report comes out, this young man will have conducted pre-operational surveillance. I will not be shocked that there is video of him in the weeks and the days before, maybe doing a dry run, getting up onto the roof, seeing how long it takes. The FBI won't release that information because that'll be part of the prosecution, and until that comes out in a court of law, this will all be months, maybe a year down the road. So I'm not shocked that he was able to get away.
Yeah, and they indicated that the surveillance footage actually maps out a lot of his locations and when he arrived on campus. So you match that with the description, and I mean, that is pretty compelling evidence, to say the least. And look, I think you raise a number of interesting points, because I did previous sidebars on, was there a lack of security? Why was there only a certain amount of UVU officers there? Did they have the help of local police or not? He only had his private security detail too. I know there was some sort of coordination, but was there lax security measures as well? The shooter, on this outside perimeter. I want to talk about the rifle. So you have this rifle that was apparently found nearby, wrapped in a towel. What does that tell you? I mean, abandoning this weapon at this location, what does that tell you when wrapped in a towel?
Well, if you're a bad guy and you are anticipating possibly being contacted by law enforcement, you're trying to effect an escape, not necessarily engage law enforcement. Usually we see active shooters who will either commit suicide once they'll either engage law enforcement and then kill themselves, or engage law enforcement and let the law enforcement officers take care of the kind of a suicide by cop. But here you see a guy who's clearly trying to effect an escape. He's trying to separate himself from the firearm. This is kind of classic. If you were to be stopped down the road, maybe stripping off the clothes that he was seen wearing, law enforcement, that officer might not, necessarily know this was your shooter, because he doesn't have a weapon on him. He's not wearing, what was initially reported as the all black clothing. So that kind of shows you maybe a little bit of premeditation, that he planned this out. If he's wrapped it in a towel, maybe that's just to conceal it, so maybe it's not observed as quickly as it was. Maybe he tried to wipe DNA and fingerprints off of it to try again down the road in a court of law. Hey, my prints aren't on that gun. There's no DNA. But I doubt that's going to be the case, because with touch DNA technology today, we're going to be able to link that firearm to the crime, to him. So, that'll come out in court, in the prosecution, of course. But yeah, separating yourself from that firearm, that's classic escape 101.
It's so strange, because you have to imagine that you knew it was going to be picked up. I hear you about ways to try to get rid of it, and try to, remove your prints, or maybe the serial number was defaced in a way and you might not be able to track it back. But it just seems like this level of planning leading up to that, and then afterwards it looks sloppy.
Yeah, and again, this young man he's young. Cerebral cortex isn't fully formed yet.
Assuming
he's got a radical.
Assuming he's the person.
He's got assuming that our suspect in custody is the person who's done this. This is all going to have to be proven in a court of law. He will be given rights. He has his constitutional rights, and he's going to have to go before a judge and a jury, and he'll have a defense attorney and all the trappings of American criminal justice. Ultimately, I always say with these attacks, especially when it comes to radical ideology, people who have ideation of violence based on some kind of a grievance, sometimes it's not rocket science. Don't read into it so much. He's a 20-something-year-old kid. He's probably, he's probably didn't put a ton of thought into it, and just thought maybe he'd get lucky and the rifle wouldn't be found.
And now you have this supposed confession, which is, if it's allowed into evidence, and if a jury would accept it, is huge. So Governor Cox said that Robinson allegedly admitted to or implied that he did this when speaking to family. And his father even apparently recognized him from the photos that were released by the FBI, urged him to turn himself in. That, if true, I wonder, goes to the pressure of the environment, Ashton, goes to the age. Is that common, what you see? You allegedly commit a heinous crime, known around the world, huge development. Are you surprised that this is true? There was an actual confession?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think people want to tell their story. People want to, I personally think, and this is my personal, having just skimmed information from the internet, I think this young man is now, he gets to be the center of the attention. He gets to be in the spotlight. I've always said, I think a lot of these shooters who do spree killings, mass shootings, active shooter scenarios are desperate for attention. They feel like they're that like loser mentality. I'm not good at anything, but I can at least be good at this. So I think you have the psychology of the moment. You take into account the ideology, the radicalization process.
Let's talk about that, because
yeah,
there were a lot of theories leading into this about what might have happened. But not only do you have this apparently supposed confession, but investigators say that family members told them that they noticed changes in his behavior in recent years, that he'd grown more political, that he mentioned Charlie Kirk. And when detectives spoke with Robinson's roommate, they uncovered even more disturbing details. Here's what Governor Combs had to say about that.
Investigators interviewed that roommate, who stated that his roommate, referring to Robinson, made a joke on Discord. Investigators asked if he would show them the messages on Discord. He opened it and showed several messages to investigators and allowed investigators to take photos of the screen as each message was shown by Robinson's roommate. These photos consisted of various messages, including content of messages between the phone contact named Tyler with an emoji icon and Robinson's roommate's device. The content of these messages included messages affiliated with the contact Tyler, stating a need to retrieve a rifle from a drop point, leaving the rifle in a bush, messages related to visually watching the area where a rifle was left, and a message referring to having left the rifle wrapped in a towel.
I mean, Ashton, this obviously prosecutors don't need to prove motive. For most crimes, they don't need to prove it, particularly for this. But it does help explain a story and why somebody would have done this. It's sometimes very hard to get into someone's mind. But I have to say, the way that Charlie Kirk was killed and where he was killed and when he was killed, based on these allegations of Mr. Robinson, it kind of makes sense.
Well, I mean, maybe it does. Ultimately, the ultimate motive of why somebody does what they do, it's so easy to try to paint it as a black and white issue, as a binary 1 or 0. He was anti-right. He was this. He was that. He had political leanings, and this is why he did it. Psychologically, deep down inside, we don't know why this young man did what he did, and he might not understand, but he uses a political motivation to kind of justify his actions. So there could be, I've even thought, a lot of these young men, young shooter who are in this age range, is this a mental illness issue? Is this the onset paranoid schizophrenia, which can sometimes show itself in that 20 to 25-year-old age? Is this, was he deep down inside jealous of Charlie Kirk? Charlie Kirk kind of embodied what the right sees as a privileged, good-looking, married to has a kid and a family, and kind of like that all-American person who's able to debate and go into these spaces where people don't agree with him, but he's still able to argue. You don't know what the motive was on this. Now, and just to dismiss it as a political thing, he might have used politics and radicalization of politics to justify it, but until maybe a psychological assessment is completed months down the road, we might not know that.
It's interesting you say that, because I was just in CrimeCon and we did a panel on Mangione, and one of the conversation points was he really upset and trying to make a statement about the health insurance industry, or did he want to kill somebody and use it as a justification to kill? Again, assuming he's innocent until proven guilty too, but assuming he did it, was that something to think about? Now, one thing people might be looking at this as we talk about, if Mr. Robinson really did commit this crime, how on earth are family or friends supposed to I mean, you can't predict something like this, but what do you say to them? You investigate all these kinds of crimes all the time. I mean, was this foreseeable?
It's very difficult. Hindsight is always 2020. I can't even imagine what the family members are going through on, not only for the victims' families, but for this young man whose life is now is over. If not the death penalty, he's facing life in prison for the rest, forever until he dies. So yeah, I'm sure those family members, it was a very hard decision to call. I think they deserve a little bit of credit for doing the right thing and calling law enforcement and saying, this is what we know. Right. And ultimately, it's they did the right thing. That's a pretty tight-knit, very religious, tight-knit community in Utah. So maybe you had that kind of affecting their decision to advise the government as to what was going on. So it's one of those tough situations.
These messages to the roommate, involving the roommate, part of the they're a little confusing. They detail retrieving, hiding this rifle, surveilling the area, preparing the weapon. Why is this documented? I mean, my gosh, that's also really compelling evidence.
Yeah, it's very compelling evidence. It almost feels like he's playing a video game. Like a first-person shooter game where you're doing all these little missions. So I'm not sure if that's what's going on in his head. I haven't read anything about what was happening with the roommate. I've heard things of, I'll leave that to I know more about it. But again, hindsight's 2020. You're in college, you're your young 20s. Most of these 20-year-old kids, they don't know to call the cops or, hey, I think my roommate's exhibiting signs of paranoid schizophrenia. They're not trained psychologists or psychiatrists. Let's see if this is just an ignorance thing on the roommate's part versus a conspiracy. It's always a conspiracy on the internet, and I don't buy conspiracy most of the time.
Well, actually, I have a sidebar coming out about all the theories surrounding Charlie Kirk's death. I think it's going to come out over the weekend, but put that to the side. So back to the rifle for a second. When officers finally tracked the shooter's path off the campus, they found this bolt-action Mauser rifle stashed in the trees. It was wrapped in a dark towel, but it wasn't just the weapon that stood out. Alongside it were these several shell casings, and investigators say that some had been deliberately engraved with bizarre messages. Here's what Governor Cox had to say.
I know there's been speculation as well as to the writing on those casings, those bullet casings, and I believe we have that as well. And I will share that with you now. So the area north of Campus Drive Road where the suspect crossed over, you saw some of that in the video that we released last night, consists of a grassy area with trees on the edge of the UVU campus. Investigators discovered a bolt-action rifle wrapped in a dark-colored towel. The rifle was determined to be a Mauser Model 98 30-06 caliber bolt-action rifle. The rifle had a scope mounted on top of it. Investigators noted inscriptions that had been engraved on casings found with the rifle. Inscriptions on a fired casing read, "Notices, bulges, capital OWO, what's this?" ? Inscriptions on the 3 unfired casings read, "Hey fascist!" ! Catch! ! Up arrow symbol, right arrow, and symbol, and 3 down arrow symbols. A second unfired casing read, "Oh Bella Chow, Bella Chow, Bella Chow, Chow Chow," and a third unfired casing read, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO.
Okay, Ash, from an investigative, from a counterterrorism perspective, what do you take away from those apparent engravings?
Well, this is where I believe the suspect knew they were going to be found. This is him, again, I get to be a part of the story. I'm the lead character. I get to play the role, and I am in the spotlight.
Just to push back, is there a possibility that he is intending to fire at least one or more of those bullets, and when they are recovered from Charlie Kirk or anyone else, then the messages could be found?
That is absolutely possible, absolutely. But again, I think this guy he sees himself as a loser. He gets to now be the center of attention. I see this in so many of these spree killings, active shooter events. Again, we want to say it's this, it's the left, it's the right, it's the insurance companies, blame the CEOs. At the end of the day, these are broken young men who want to be the center of attention. And I think when you leave rounds with inscriptions on them to be found by law enforcement, that's you playing that part, almost like a live action role play.
You put that to the side. From a lawyer's point of view, from a prosecutor's point of view, they would argue that shows premeditation. To actually take the time to engrave that and very specific messages, premeditation. Okay, let's talk about the clothing and what we learned about what the suspect was apparently wearing before and after the shooting. So investigators say Robinson actually tried to disguise himself that day.
When he's first spotted on campus, he has different clothing on, and then he changes clothing on the roof, and then changed back into that clothing at some point, so that when he was apprehended, when he was arrested, the clothing matched the clothing he had on before the shooting here at UVU.
Now, Robinson was apparently spotted on campus that morning in a maroon t-shirt, light shorts, black hat, sneakers, and when officers found him later, he was still in clothes that matched that description. So Ashton, again, that's another key piece of identifying evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Shows the premeditation, shows the planning, shows the malice aforethought. He's wearing clothes that, this T-shirt has this patriotic symbol on it with a patriotic messaging. So it's to me, I'm blending into my area. You wouldn't want to wear purple hair and pierced face everywhere, and that's going to stand out in that community, in that area. So he's going to wear what would blend to the area. I think, again, yes. And then putting on a disguise and taking it off absolutely shows to the premeditation of that.
Why not just change into a completely different third outfit? I mean, to wear the one that was apparently captured on surveillance, that one's strange to me.
Yeah, again, 20-something-year-old young kid, he might not have put as much planning into it. It's a little bit of that video live action role-playing thing. Maybe he didn't have the clothes.
Look, this is still in the early stages. We have a lot more that we need to cover about this. This is kind of a beginning of the evidence that you're seeing going to be presented in a case. We know that he's being held on certain charges. I don't believe at the time of this recording he's actually been charged, but aggravated murder appears to be on the table. So we will continue to see what the evidence is that is built against this individual. But Ashton Packe, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram or X. I'm Jesse Weber. See you next time.